Hey, I'll try to do this in 10 minutes.
Oh, you can do it.
I can do it. We'll shift into high gear here. I feel like I'm almost teaching my children's church class. They're all sitting down front here. Oh, you guys going to pay attention? All right. Let's take a look at the book of Genesis, chapter 12. In our lives, there are events that take place of great importance. And it's traditional for us each year to look back at the end of the year at the events that's gone on in the year before. On a national scale, we observe these dates like Memorial Day, Pearl Harbor Day, Independence Day, to observe celebrations and the disasters that have happened throughout the year. But our spiritual lives have these same kinds of events that happen. And it's important for us to go back and review those things as well. The celebrations, the losses, the testings, the trials, but most of all, the victories that come from each event. Every Christian should have what I'm referring to tonight as an altar to mark the importance of the spiritual events that happens in their lives. So we're going to start here with Genesis 12:7. It says, "And the Lord appeared unto Abraham and said, Unto thy seed will I give this land, and there builded he an altar unto the Lord who appeared unto him." Jump ahead to chapter 12 and verse 8. It says, "And he removed from thence unto a mountain on the east of Bethel, and pitched his tent, having Bethel on the west and Hai on the east. And there he builded an altar unto the Lord, and called upon the name of the Lord." I'm going to jump ahead one more time to chapter 13, verse 18. "Then Abraham removed his tent, and came and dwelt in the plain of Mamre, which is in Hebron, and built there an altar unto the Lord." One more jump to chapter 22. 22 verse 9. And it says, "And they came to a place which God had told him of, and Abram built an altar there, and laid the wood on wood in order, and bound Isaac his son, and laid him on the altar upon the wood." We were just talking about Abraham this morning in children's church. Okay? So the first item that I want to take a look at, because we're going to be looking at these altars that we've been talking about, okay? So the first item that we see is an altar of appearance, which takes place in Genesis 12:7. And it says, "And the Lord appeared unto Abram." Can you remember the day that you knew that you needed Christ?
Amen.
That day that he appeared in your life and you understood that you needed to be saved?
Amen.
You know, that also happens in our Christian lives later on as we begin to get older and we've been Christians for a long time. Sometimes God has to make that reappearance in our life as well.
Right.
It's not just a one-time thing. God comes back and revisits us all the time. He's there all the time. We're just not always paying attention to him is all. In 2 Timothy 1:5 it says, "When I call into remembrance the unfeigned faith that is in thee, which dwelleth first in thy grandmother Lois, and thy mother Eunice, and I am persuaded in thee also. Wherefore I put thee in remembrance, that thou stir up the gift of God which is in thee by the putting on of my hands." Paul was reminding Timothy, have that altar. Remember where you're coming from. It's very important. When we first accept Christ in our life, we build in our memory what might be called an altar. It's a moment of remembrance that we return to on a regular basis. It represents that initiation of our personal relationship with Christ. So our second item that we see is an altar of calling. Now, calling goes in two different directions. You may say, "Oh, well, you know, the Lord called you to do this, or the Lord called you to do that." Well, he called us all to do something, first off. But we also have to call upon him as well. So there's two parts to this. Letter A is a calling of God. Go ahead and turn to Genesis chapter 12. We're going to look at verses 1 through 4 here real quickly. It says, "Now the Lord had said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee. And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and I will make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse them that curseth thee, and in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed." Well, thank God for Abram.
Amen.
You know, we wouldn't be anywhere without God choosing him. This is what started it all. This is exciting. So Abram departed as the Lord had spoken unto him, and Lot went with him, and Abram was 75 years old when he departed out of Haran. God called out Abram and separated him from his family, from his friends, and took him to a new place where he had never been before. Wow, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? Isn't that what God did to all of us when we got saved? He called us out from our earthly family, our fleshly family, and he set us apart and has taken us to places that we never knew we were going to go to. Okay? God has done that same thing for all of us. In 2 Corinthians 6:17 it says, "Wherefore come out from among them and be ye separate." That's what we're just talking about. Saith the Lord, "And toucheth not the unclean thing, and I will receive you, and I will be a father unto you, and ye shall be my sons and daughters, saith the Lord Almighty." So in letter B in this particular altar calling, we see the calling of Abraham. Now, this is, like I said, a two-way street. We should also be calling upon the Lord. Let's take a look at Genesis 12:8, okay? We're going to just skip down a couple of verses here, and it says, "And he removed from thence unto a mountain on the east of Bethel, and pitched his tent, having Bethel on the west, and Hai on the east, and there he builded an altar unto the Lord." But it doesn't stop there, does it? "And he called upon the name of the Lord."
Man.
He could have just gone and built the altar and been done with it. He didn't have to call upon the Lord, but he did. That's a part of that two-way communication that I'm always talking about with the kids. We have that two-way communication that we've got to have. We've got God's word where he's speaking to us, and we have our prayer time where we're speaking to him. Okay? So, as I've been standing here talking, I'm sure many of you have reviewed a memory in your own life when God has called on you to do something. And when you have in return called on him. And that's the best way to have a relationship. It's the best way for a relationship to grow and flourish. Two-way communication is imperative in any relationship. Sam was just talking about that this morning in Sunday school. Okay, so we come to our third item here, an altar of dwelling. Okay, so let's take a look at Genesis 13:11 through 18. Okay. 11, it says, "Then Lot chose him the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated themselves the one from the other. Abram dwelt in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelt in the cities of the plain, and pitched his tent towards Sodom. But the men of Sodom were wicked and sinners before the Lord exceedingly. And the Lord said unto Abram, after that Lot was separated from him, Lift up now thine eyes, and look from the place where thou art, northward, southward, eastward, and westward. For all the land which thou seest, to thee I give it, and to thy seed forever. And I will make thy seed as the dust of the earth, so that if a man can count the number of the dust of the earth, then shall thy seed also be numbered. Arise, walk through the land, and in the length of it and in the breadth of it, for I give it unto thee. Then Abram removed his tent and came and dwelt in the plain of Mamre, which is in Hebron, and built there an altar unto the Lord."
Amen.
Okay. Abram was just receiving a confirmation. Did you see it? He's confirming to him what he promised him before. See, before, when he was leaving Haran, God said, I want you to go to this place where I'm going to lead you to, and I'm going to bless you. And then he repeats it now after they've had this big blowout with Lot and his family. And all of his sheep herders and everybody, they've all split off. They've gone off into the valley of the plain. And now Abram is there by himself with his family, his servants, all of his cattle and sheep, and God confirms what he told him before. Okay? God will give us that confirmation. We were just talking about that this morning, weren't we? I didn't plan on that happening, by the way. That wasn't part of my lesson plan this morning. It just happened. Okay? Letter A, we see that he removed. In Genesis 13:18, it says, Then Abraham removed his tent. Okay? So, I'm going to make a little leap here. Having your alone time with God each day is very important. And it's even more important to not have any distraction during that time. I have really discovered in the last year that any kind of little distraction is going to totally ruin my study time. And it has ruined it for me time and time again throughout this last year. And finally, being the brilliant person that I am, it finally struck me one day, maybe I need to get away from all of this. Might get something more accomplished if I could focus a little better. Okay? For Abraham, Lot could have been identified as a source of distraction. He was a remnant of his life before he met God, and their splitting actually cut the last tie to the old ways. How many of you have hung on to that one thing after you've gotten saved from your previous life that you don't want to let go of? And yet you keep coming back to that item, and that item is what drags you back into sin. Over and over and over and over. Okay? Lot was that representation of that. And Lot's out of the way now. And God's confirmed his message to him, okay? Even as a saved child of God, it's easy for us to want to run back to the old ways of doing things from the times before we surrendered our lives to him. Spiritually, we know better, but those fleshly desires are still present. We still live in these bodies, If we're not careful, we can easily fall back into those ways, handling stress and pressure in the ways that we used to do it, which never works right. Okay? And again, that was something else that Sam talked about this morning. There's all kinds of links to stuff today. Removing ourselves and having the alone time that we need without distraction is very important because it ties to this next point.
Right.
Letter B. He dwelt. In verse 18, it says, and he came and he dwelt in the plain of Mamre, which is in Hebron. The definition of the word dwelt is very interesting. It means to sit down, specifically as a judge, to remain, to return, to seat, to settle down, or to sit down. I thought the judge was interesting because, people always say, well, you shouldn't judge. But you need to be able to sit down and judge those things that are right and wrong in your life. And you need to be able to make the right decisions to go the right ways. Okay? How long has it been since you've dwelt in the place where God has chosen for you? You might say, what kind of question is that? Well, have you dwelt in his word? Have you dwelt in your prayer time? Have you dwelt in contemplation over all these things? It's a simple matter to get caught up in the daily routine of life and to lose sight of spending quality time with God. Now, I have to admit, I've been lacking in this department through most of the year. About 3 months ago, it finally struck me, maybe things aren't going right because you're just being stupid and not doing what you're supposed to be doing. Wow. Light bulb. Okay? So you've got to have that quality time with God. You've got to be able to sit down and you've got to be able to just chew that stuff for a while.
Amen.
To think about it, to dwell on it, to ponder it. Okay? Which brings us to letter C. He built. And it says, and he built there an altar unto the Lord. As a memorial and a sign of his loyalty to God, Abraham built an altar in this place where he was dwelling, where he dwelt at. God did not command him to do this. God didn't tell you go build an altar. He just went and did it. He did this as a sign of his love and affection for his loyalty to his God. It took effort. First off, it took time. Wow, imagine that. Running a business, I have found, takes effort, and it takes time. And there's often times where I'm doing stuff at the business and I think, oh wow, this must be the way that it is for my preacher trying to get things done with us. Because I can't tell you how many times I've told my clients, this is how you handle this situation. This is what you do. If you want to prevent this from happening, follow these steps. Do this, do this, do this, do this, and everything will go fine. And then I sit there and I go, oh yeah, preacher just said that last Sunday. Stupid me. Okay? It's funny how those things kind of go off in your brain. Do we desire to show our love and affection for God in something tangible? Abraham's altar was seen by everyone in his family and his servants. And I had to ask myself, have I thought and planned? Are my efforts seen? Are they obvious to others? I'm afraid most of the time, probably not. I'm sure that a lot of you out there think that I'm just a goofball that doesn't know what he's doing and what he's talking about. And you'd probably be right in most of it. But sometimes that light bulb has to go off in your head and you have to say, oh, wow, this is the way that things are supposed to be done.
Right.
Okay? Are my efforts seen? Are they obvious to others? Think about that again. Not in a prideful way, but in a casual, natural process of daily life. You know, people should be able to see us and know that we're Christians just by the way that we act, by the way that we dress. And it's not because we're standing up here going, look at me, I'm Mr. Christian. That's not the way, that's not it. I mean, they should just see that just as a natural process. There's something different about this person. What is it? Okay? That's what we should be striving for. Then we come to our last item here. Item 4, it's an altar of placing. Okay, in Genesis 22:9, let's take a look at that. Genesis 22:9. Okay, and they came to the place which God had told him of. Notice where he says, God had told him of. And Abram built an altar there, and laid the wood in order, and bound Isaac his son, and laid him on the altar of the wood. It's important to be in the place that God has chosen for us. God chose for Abram to be in that place. He told him of that place. God had told him of that place, and he was there. Abram, there's 4 items here that Abram did. Abram went to where God said to go. He went even though he knew what was going to happen, or so he thought. You know, God said, I want you to take your son and sacrifice him. Abraham's like, oh no, my only son, and I've got to do this to him. Okay? So he thought he knew what was going to happen. Funny how God does that. He built the altar in a place that was not comfortable to him. They had to travel 3 days to get to this place. 3 days he had to sit and think about what he was going to do when he got there. 3 days to go, oh, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. How many Saturday mornings have I gotten up in the morning and go, I don't want to go do visitation? But you still go and you do it because it's what's right. Okay? He did as God commanded him to do. God had told him to sacrifice his son, and he obeyed, never questioning. There's never one comment in this whole passage where he says, but God, really? You really want me to do this? He didn't do it. Okay? Can we say that of ourselves? I know I can't. I'm always questioning God on everything. Are you sure about this? I'm not sure about this. Okay? But God rewarded his obedience. Not only did he stay his hand and keep him from killing his own son, but then he turned around and gave him another sacrifice. He didn't have to go hunt for it. It was right there. Okay? Turn around, and wow, where'd that guy come from? Okay? So in conclusion, do we have altars in our lives? Do we mark the events that are important? I have to share with you, in my family, there are events that we look back on that have happened in years past, because those events give us identity. Right. If we didn't have the family, my family has a very rich history. I love my family. There's a lot of bad stuff in my family, but there's a lot of good stuff in my family as well. But it gives us identity. It ties us to something tangible, okay? It ties us to our past. It's good to look back and remember those things that have happened in years past, not just in a family sense, but in the spiritual sense as well. We can look back and say, look what God did here. Look what God did there.
Right.
I've been the last person on the face of the planet to do that the last few years. I've been so concerned about everything else under the sun that I've totally lost sight of that.
Right.
And it's only been recently that that has finally triggered in my mind. And I'm like, oh, God really has blessed. God's given us a lot of things that there's no way that we could have ever gotten. But he's given it to us. It's been out of the blue, and he's still doing it. And it's not just things, it's just the joy of it all. It's even more important for us to mark those important events in our spiritual lives because they give us identity and tie us to the goodness of God. It's easy to start to feel alone and lost when we forget those things that he has done for us. So remember, have those altars in your life.
Amen.
And don't forget.
Amen.
Thank you.